Hello and welcome back to the Pain Free for Life podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Vanbergen, and today I'm joined by Karta Purkh Singh Khalsa, who goes by KP. KP is an herbalist, nutritionist, yoga teacher, and educator who's been making holistic health approaches palatable to the modern mind for over 50 years. He was the first person to be professionally certified in both herbalism and Ayurveda in the US. He is President Emeritus of the American Herbalists Guild and Director Emeritus of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. In this episode, KP and I discuss the role of viruses in creating both acute and chronic pain. And we discuss actionable remedies and supplements with doses for both chronic and acute infections with roots in traditional Chinese medicine and beyond. If you are interested in boosting immunity and ridding yourself of viruses within your body, within your cells, this is a must-listen episode.
Welcome back to Pain Free for Life, where we share how to successfully overcome all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And now, here's your host, co-founder, and board-certified holistic healthcare practitioner, Dr. Rob Vanbergen.
KP, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Good to be here.
So listen, I want to talk about viruses today. And this is something that comes up a lot with my clients because they're often concerned about things like latent viruses within their body and whether or not or they believe or they've experienced that that's where kind of their chronic pain journey began. So could you kind of elaborate a little bit, like how do viruses cause short-term and long-term pain?
Well, when you have a virus, it's difficult to know exactly what's going on. We could talk a little bit later about how you would know whether you have a virus, but the body then responds to this invader in all kinds of ways to try to get it out. Acute viruses like cold or flu, coronaviruses, we've heard a lot about those certainly recently, end up in the body, and the body then wants to get them out by all means necessary. And so all the things that you experience as symptoms are things that your body is doing to get them out. So raising the temperature, so you have a fever, muscle aches and pains, of course. Everybody has that experience of having an achy back with the flu, that sort of thing. Then also runny nose, the body is trying to flush them out if they're reproductive, and so many other different things depending on the virus. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of viruses that can affect people, and each one is a bit different, but they're very highly evolved to infect people in a very specific way. So they might be a respiratory virus or a liver virus or a digestive tract virus, but they go to where they are designed to do their job, and then the body doesn't have a great way to get rid of them except to just sort of pull out all the stops and do all these things. So you might have vomiting and diarrhea. All of those things are uncomfortable. And, they're sort of in the realm of pain, headache, for example. So most people have some kind of pain when they have a latent virus that's going on and difficulty, getting rid of it, or even an acute virus, that kind of pain that really puts us down for a week or so when we have the flu. But the nice thing is there are many things you can do to prevent that, to bolster your immune system so you don't get those in the first place, and that to treat them if you have an acute virus or long-term, again, immune support to get rid of the latent virus.
Right. And I know so your specialty is kind of in Ayurvedic medicine, right? So there's a lot of food as medicine in there and things like that.
People often say that, but really I just become known as the Ayurveda guy because I was one of the first people 50 years ago to begin to bring it up and talk about it. But really, I have a very broad spectrum perspective. My specialty is neurology and natural neurology, and that very much dovetails with this idea of the chronic viruses. So since I have a lot of Ayurvedic knowledge, I definitely apply that. Food as medicine is a great thing to consider for long-term benefit, but for most people, it's not going to do very much for their either latent virus or their acute virus. Most people don't understand food as medicine, and they just did this morning. In fact, I had a client and we were talking about his cholesterol, and among other things, I suggested that he concentrate on garlic in his diet. So I just did a follow-up today, and he had been using culinary amounts of garlic. In other words, 2 drops of garlic in the spaghetti sauce 3 times a week. Completely misunderstood what was going to happen. So yeah, Ayurveda does include a lot of food as medicine, but that's really for much more long-term benefit, the way you want your body to be over a lifetime, not necessarily treating actual active disease with food. Ayurveda would be more likely to use herbal medicine for that.
Understood. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. I was going to say, is there any sort of specific foods and things like that that are good for a short term? But it just sounds like, for a short term cold, just, as you said, over a longer period of time, if you have a good, healthy diet, then you're going to have an easier time getting rid of or combating these viruses and things.
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay. So in this process of short-term, long-term pain, which viruses might be involved? Because you mentioned coronavirus and colds and things like that, but obviously there are some that hit harder than others.
Yeah, well, short-term, what we would call a cold. The thing is, there's no way to really distinguish between cold or flu when you're experiencing it. And even if you have a lab test, usually they would take a swab from your respiratory tract, and there's a whole lot of things in your mouth, and any given virus might come out in a culture or not. So medical doctors are kind of guessing. So influenza is the flu is short for the term influenza, which means a particular set of viruses, and there are many different varieties. And then colds, which again, virtually indistinguishable. And from a natural healing point of view, it doesn't really matter whether we have the specific name, it's cold or flu. We're doing the same things anyway. Rhinovirus, rhino means nose, and so rhinovirus is one of the causes of cold. There are over 100 different viruses that cause what we think of the common cold, and many of them are coronaviruses. We got really educated about coronavirus here, recently with the COVID, but of course there had been coronaviruses around before, and many very serious epidemics, like maybe we remember SARS from a few years ago. That's a coronavirus. But others that are much less intense and that people have had for centuries that just present like a cold. And we pretty much do all the same kinds of things. In terms of more chronic viruses, a lot of them are in the herpes family. So chickenpox, for example, is a herpes virus. Now, most people today under the age of, 40 or 50 have had a chickenpox vaccine. And so they're not going to get that. But people who had chickenpox have the virus in them, and that can then reassert itself and become an active acute virus. But many other herpes viruses, so Epstein-Barr virus, of course, cytomegalovirus, human herpes virus number 6, and there's another 3 or 4 that are pretty common. So those are the ones usually that are an issue. And then if we go full bore into the virus world, there are dozens or hundreds of other various viruses that you can get. And if your body doesn't fight them off, many of them can stay in your body forever. And they go into the word that you use, a latent phase, where they are just cooking away. And if your immune system isn't able to conquer them, then they come back out. So chickenpox virus comes back out as shingles when somebody is, 70 years old. And it's been in there the whole time. And then it just bursts out when the immune system has been suppressed by stress or dietary issues or whatever it may be. So most people who did not get that vaccine have the chickenpox virus in them. It can come out. So your body is fighting these things all the time, whether it's Epstein-Barr virus that causes mononucleosis. So most of us were exposed to that as teenagers. And maybe we had a symptomatic case. We all remember people from our high school that one day were there, the next day they weren't. And we got the word that they had mono, and they came back, the next year. So those people had a very symptomatic case, but most of us got through it. It was like a mild case of the flu. We were sick for a weekend or so, and then that was it. And the virus stayed in there. So at the very least, we want to be able to suppress these viruses. Whether we can kill them is kind of a debatable point. I mean, my perspective is that if your body can kill them in the acute phase, it probably should be able to kill them in the chronic phase. But there's no way to prove that, because you're going to have the antibodies to these viruses forever in your body. So all you can test is viral load, which is doable, but that's very expensive. And even so, that only tests down to a certain level. So if you have even one virus particle left, of course, it can then reproduce. So these viruses may be very deeply suppressed in your body as a middle-aged adult. And then when your immune system starts to fail due to a lifetime of dietary indiscretions and that sort of thing, then they come back out. So people find these painful diseases Chronic fatigue syndrome is often of viral origin, for example, and people often have daily pain from that, or fibromyalgia. Again, those are the same disease, really, and they come from a viral origin largely. And then people are sick and in pain, and fibromyalgia, of course, is known for the symptom of pain.
Yes. Yes. And one of those things with fibromyalgia, too, is that it has that very specific diagnosis of all those different points. And some people are like, I'm like 2 points short, but everyone's going to experience these things the same way. So I think there's a lot of undiagnosed fibromyalgia out there. And sounds like the root of that could be, or the root of a lot of this could be viruses. So one thing I think is interesting, you mentioned, chicken pox, for example, and I grew up in the UK, and in the UK, it was like super common to have chicken pox parties and get all the kids together when one kid in the neighborhood had it. And let's get it all, everyone getting it now. So,
right.
Yeah. And I think it's the same. My cousins still live there, and they still do that now to this day.
Really?
And I'm like, so people, what I'm kind of thinking from this perspective is that this is something that everyone will experience in their life, or just if their immune system fails, are these things going to come back later on? How do you view that?
Well, chickenpox in particular is such a virus with a strong energy that it's very difficult for the immune system to avoid it with no symptoms. It probably does happen sometimes. My brother and I were both at a chickenpox party, and I got the chickenpox, and I had, maybe 6 blisters the whole time. I felt completely normal, but I had to stay out of school for 2 weeks. My brother was just covered with them, So even though we grew up with the same diet, same family, all that, our bodies responded very differently, to that. So even though it may not be possible to completely avoid catching it and having a little something like I had, there are definitely things that we can do to help people feel better while they're having that experience. Although, of course, my parents knew nothing about any of that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is kind of a bit of a rabbit hole of a question. So my question will be, how do we know we have a virus? But it presumably sounds like we just assume we do.
Yeah, most of it's really going to be about symptoms, and each one of these viruses has a very characteristic set of symptoms. There are blood tests pretty much for all of them, and so you could take a look at that. There's a herpes panel, for example, that includes about 6 of the most common herpes viruses, and we think of herpes, of course, as being either cold sores or genital herpes, but it's that whole family: Epstein-Barr virus with the mononucleosis and all those ones I mentioned. So you can pick up those with the panel. What those are actually measuring is antibodies. But if your antibodies are sky high, it just means that your body is actively fighting it. It's a pretty good way to be able to tell. Multiple sclerosis, for example, one of the leading theories about that is that it's a virus. And in fact, the culprit is thought to be Epstein-Barr virus. So if you look, in fact, a lot of the, speaking of UK, a lot of the studies on Epstein-Barr virus and multiple sclerosis have been done there because it's a country that's thin in a longitudinal direction. It's a vertical island. And so the difference in climate from the south to the north is pretty noticeable. So you have differences of sun exposure. And it turns out that there's an exact correlation between both Epstein-Barr virus and multiple sclerosis geographically.
Really?
Yeah, in the UK. Yeah. So it turns out that a lot of these studies have been done in Europe, but it turns out that multiple sclerosis is very much associated with Epstein-Barr virus rates. Now, there's no direct connection. That may just be correlation. It may not be causation, but it's pretty interesting. So there are probably a lot of the diseases that we struggle with today, we're going to find out have a viral etiology eventually once we can, do all this work. But in the meantime, you look up the symptoms of whatever virus you think it might be and compare those to the symptoms of your disorder. And you have to probably, again, a rabbit hole, as you said, go down this rabbit hole or talk to an expert, and then you can begin to treat it. But it's probably not going to be any harm to treat it. Use antiviral kinds of things and immune system enhancing things. And if your symptoms, including your pain, get better, then it was a good clinical trial and you're in good shape.
Right. Absolutely. So do you think that geographic change is, you mentioned this lack of the sun or less sun, you think it's all vitamin D and immune system? It's just kind of connected in that way, or?
Yeah, that's the theory. And I think that probably there's something very much to that. I'm not sure if that's the only thing, but that's what they were looking at in all these European studies. And so they also correlated multiple sclerosis with vitamin D level, and there was a very good correlation. So, yeah, that's the idea. And there are probably many other different factors, but that one was pretty clear cut.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd assume they'd get similar test results if they would have kind of surveyed the entire US from like Florida up north. And
Right. And in fact, those surveys have been done for things like fibromyalgia, and there's a very much of a connection. Fibromyalgia rates are much higher in the northern United States compared to, let's say, Florida, and
okay,
then likewise with multiple sclerosis.
right.
So they haven't gone quite as far as to connect them as directly as the European studies, but all the data are there, and it looks pretty likely.
Right. Awesome. Okay. Interesting. So, all right. So we assume we have these viruses in our bodies and they're either acute or chronic in these situations. So let's kind of separate those out. How would you go about treating acute viruses naturally?
Well, vitamin D you mentioned, there's one. Now, vitamin D, when we first realized that we'd been wrong about vitamin D for decades and realized how important it was, people were beginning to use very large doses of vitamin D as a loading dose. One of the people in the field called it the vitamin D hammer. Now, you don't hear very much about that anymore for one reason. I think people got scared off by it, but people were using doses of, let's say, 50,000 units of vitamin D a day for maybe a month, just a loading dose. So that's well below any concern with toxicity. And then you maintain the amount of vitamin D in the body that keeps the vitamin D at the blood at about 75 nanograms per milliliter. So that would be a good basic blood level. And for most people, that's going to be in the 5 to 10,000 unit range. And so I'm not sure why everybody stopped using that. I went back to do some research on that recently, and I could hardly find any mention of that high vitamin D loading dose anywhere on the internet. It had all been taken down. So I think it's just because clients had a freak out when they saw that dose and just said that's 10 times higher than is recommended by bloggers on the internet. So I guess it must be bad. Anyway, so that's a possibility. If you still feel comfortable with that, you could do a loading dose of vitamin D. I use that when I can convince people that it's safe, and it's dramatically effective. Very often people feel better within hours, and often by the end of the first day, their symptoms are gone. From the herbal perspective, there are a couple of Chinese medicines that really deliver. One is called Yin Chao. That's YinQiao, Yin Chao. One of the most common medicines in China for cold and flu. And that's designed to be taken when you're just first getting the symptoms. So you have to have it around. You wake up in the morning, you have that spinny head, achy back feeling. You hit it hard with the Yin Chao. And then the other one is Gamoling, GANMAOLING, which literally means excellent for the common cold. Gamao is the common cold. And that one is designed to work best once you've had the disease for a couple of days and it's working its way into your body. Now, both of them are very similar formulas, and the traditional distinction between which one to take when is probably pretty persnickety. And frankly, both of them are likely to work, but you have to have them around to be useful. So in my house, we have supplies of both of these. The key to using both of these is to take enough. So the typical dose of these in Chinese medicine is about 30 grams a day. That's a lot of medicine, and people see that in their hand and just go, oh my God, that's so much. I can't believe that I could really use that much. But Chinese doses tend to be high. So you take that much as soon as possible, which is going to be the whole bottle of pills, one entire bottle per day. So once people are convinced that that's safe and comfortable, usually, again, it just knocks it right out that day. And then you can take it another day just to be sure. And then you're done. So those are excellent. Another one is echinacea, which of course everybody has heard of. Personally, I feel like echinacea is more effective for bacterial infection, but it really got a lot of attention over the last, let's say, 40 years for treating colds. And it does work that way. And again, you have to take enough to do the job. So if you're taking echinacea root powder in capsules, again, a dose of 30 grams would not be unreasonable. And that would knock it out, again, in the first day or so. Our goal in natural medicine is when you have an acute virus that you're symptom-free in 24 hours. And if that didn't happen, then we did something wrong. So it might not be completely gone in 24 hours. You take it another day or two just to make sure. Most people fail with echinacea. I talk to people all the time that said, man, that echinacea worked great. I had a cold and I took it. Instead of my cold lasting 8 days, it lasted 7 days. Well, that's not success. We want it to knock out in a day. So most people are inappropriately using tincture, for example, and taking 10 drops like it says on the bottle. By the way, this is a good time just to say that the doses on the bottle of natural medicines are not the real dose. We all groan and think, oh man, why is that? That's the dose that the company thinks won't freak you out, not the dose that they think actually is going to work. It's very frustrating. And the poor consumer just has no idea what to do. I took two capsules of echinacea, like it said, and nothing happened. What's wrong? Well, you should have taken 25. But the company feels like if you take 25 and have a tummy ache, you'll never buy from them again. And they would rather have you have lack of success than have success and a side effect.
Right.
Anyway, those are some good possibilities for acute viruses.
Interesting. So I was going to ask about the two herbal ones you mentioned. Can you take them at the same time, or would you do it like, one in the first as the symptoms are coming on, and then the other one kind of when they've been there for a few days?
That would be the official Chinese way to do it. But honestly, they're very similar formulas. Their energetics are the same. They have a bunch of overlapping ingredients. So there's no need to take both of them.
Okay.
You can take one. And the Chinese medicine is full of these very persnickety rules. And we can feel free to bend them. Chinese doctors bend these rules all the time. It's just the official system has very, rigid rules about ways to do things. So what I find is usually that if you find that one of these remedies works for you for a cold, probably your other blood relatives in your family, not your spouse, but your children and your parents and your siblings would also do well with that same remedy. So you could figure that out. So the Johnson family all does well with yin chow, something like that.
That makes sense. Yeah. So then you just kind of know which one to keep on hand. You don't need to have.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And you can just get those. Are they hard to obtain in the US or?
Oh, not at all. They're very easily available. Many health food stores have them now, or nutrition stores, I should call them now, I guess. And you can get them on Amazon easily. So again, you have to have them on hand, but in the bottle, they'll last more or less forever. So even if you if you buy them this year and cold season is coming up in another 4 or 5 months, and you don't use it, you could use it the next time.
Right. Okay. So there's not really any risk of waste or anything like that.
That's right.
Okay. So that's acute viruses. What about chronic viruses?
Yeah. So let me mention a few here. Again, 2 Chinese herbs. The first one is astragalus, which is very popular. I think probably most people have heard of it. That is a very general, broad spectrum builder. It's actually in the tonic category in Chinese medicine, not the antiviral category. So let's think of it as a junior ginseng. But when you take it consistently over time, one of the things that it does is to support your immune system. So we focused on that aspect of it in our culture. The problem, again, is that people don't take enough. So astragalus, if you're going to make tea out of it, which is the typical Chinese way to do it, you would decoct, in other words, simmer the raw sliced root and drink that tea. And a typical dose to treat a chronic or a virus that you wanted to support over the long term would be about 15 grams a day. Astragalus actually tastes pretty good. It's pretty easy to use. So you simmer up 15 grams and drink that every day. It was suggested during COVID by the Chinese government that astragalus be used. And my family, we were drinking astragalus every day, all of us during COVID. We didn't get COVID, so I'm not quite sure when, it's hard to know if it worked or not, but it's good for kids, suitable for children, and it has a decent taste. The other herb is Isatides. That's Isatidis, Isatides. And again, we use the root. This one also is considered to be suitable for children, and astragalus and Isatides are thought to be synergistic. So astragalus is a little bit warming. Isatides is pretty cooling, so they offset each other in that way. Isatides in Chinese medicine typically would be, again, simmered into tea, but it tastes really bad. So I'm inclined to use it as pills, and that's pretty available. And again, the typical dose there for long-term support would be about, let's say, 10 grams. something like that. So if you wanted to use them synergistically, you could drink astragalus tea every day and take a few pills of the Isatides for long-term support. Another combination that's especially good for long-term herpes viruses, all those ones we were talking about earlier, is the combination of black walnut hull. That's the actual fruit of the black walnut. So black walnuts, that's a Western herb. And when they grow, they have a fruit. We never see it when we eat the nut, but that fruit is on the tree. And so that fruit is harvested and dried, ground to powder. So that's the black walnut hull powder. And then along with that, you can use gum benzoin. That's a dried plant sap called the gum from Indonesia, gum benzoin. And those two herbs would never have been used together in history. But now in this generation, we can get anything from anywhere. So as we begin to experiment with these things, I was treating chronic viruses for about 10 years as part of my practice. That's all I did for 10 years was treat chronic viruses. And with a lot of experimentation, I found out that black walnut hull and gum benzoin were synergistic and worked well for those long-term herpes viruses like Epstein-Barr virus. So the typical dose of those two, you would take them both in pill form. And the typical dose would be about 15 grams of the total. So, maybe 7 grams of each, something like that. But you could experiment a little bit with the proportions. So people with viral chronic fatigue syndrome, for example, might start taking that. And within about 3 months, they typically would feel consistently better. And by about 6 months, would feel pretty normal. And then typically we would start to reduce the dose over, let's say, the next 6 months. As long as they were still feeling good, we would reduce it a little bit every month or so. And so you're taking it over the course of about a year, and that digs into your body deeply, supports your immune system, and wipes out the virus. Been very successful. So that was something that I actually discovered just in clinical practice, but I've talked about it now for decades, written about it, spoken at conferences, and hundreds of other people have come to me and validated that it worked well in their practice. So I think it's pretty locked in.
Excellent. Okay. So these combinations of things then, because we're talking about getting rid of chronic viruses or, suppressing them by boosting the immune system. Are you talking about actually using these to destroy these chronic viruses in our bodies, or to keep the immune system strong enough that they don't surface themselves?
Well, ultimately, ideally, they would be destroyed. But again, it's impossible to know because you still have the antibodies. You're going to have the antibodies forever because you were exposed to the virus. So the only way to do that, again, is a viral load test. And those are good, but they don't test all the way down to the level of one last virus. So if you leave one virus particle left, it can reproduce at any time. So either they're suppressing the virus so well that it's just not active and hopefully will never be active again, or it's destroying them. It's destroying some active virus, obviously, because you're improving white cell production and that sort of thing. So the viruses are being destroyed to some certain extent, but many of these viruses go latent in the nervous system and the immune system has a hard time getting to them. We don't really know very well how possible it is for the immune system to actually get in there and kill them. The research just isn't there. So Either they're permanently suppressed or gone. Either one would be pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to our listeners who are dealing with chronic pain, this should actually help their chronic pain if it's virus related by dealing with the virus, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. All right, KP. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all of your information. I think especially the specifics with the dosages, because as you said, that is a big thing that gets people in this place where they're not doing the right thing. So hopefully some people are comfortable enough to take this information and actually apply it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my pleasure being here.
So to our listeners, I do encourage you to check out KP's work. I'm going to include all of the links to where you can connect with him and all of his work at painfreeforlife.com/podcast. I'm Dr. Rob Vanbergen, and you're listening to Pain Free for Life.
Thanks for listening to Pain Free for Life. Be sure to follow us, share the show with family and friends, and leave us a review on iTunes. Every time you share the show, you are helping someone take their life back from pain. Visit painfreeforlife.com for more resources, including our free guides to microcurrent, the Hache protocol and inflammation, as well as our blog and online community full of people just like you, successfully overcoming all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And stay tuned for the next episode of Pain Free for Life.